The vintage Cabernet didn't feel expensive when it hit my face. It just felt cold. I sat there, liquid dripping onto the pristine white tablecloth of the velvet room, looking up at Barbara. She held the empty crystal glass like a weapon and sneered. "Consider that disinfectant for your commoner smell," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "If you want to marry into the Coleman lineage, the entrance fee is a check for $150,000. Right now." I looked at my fiancé, Brian, expecting horror. Instead, he chuckled nervously and stared at the floor. I didn't scream. I just stared at the red stain, realizing that my relationship wasn't a romance. It was a failed investment. Pause for a second, drop a comment telling me the wildest financial demand an in-law or partner has ever made of you. I need to know. I am not the only one who attracts these people. The silence in the velvet room was heavy, thick enough to choke on. Everyone, the waiters, the wealthy patrons at the nearby tables, and certainly Barbara was waiting for the explosion. They expected the weeping, the screaming, the trembling hands of a woman humiliated. They wanted a scene. I decided right then and there not to give them the show they believed they had purchased. I calmly picked up a linen napkin from the table. I didn't scrub. I simply dabbed at my blouse. I looked down at the fabric. It was a prototype from my fall collection, a high-grade silk weave treated with a hydrophobic nanocoating I had spent 6 months developing. The red wine didn't soak in. It beaded up like mercury and rolled harmlessly off the material, pooling onto the floor. It was perfect. My armor was intact. Brian finally spoke, his voice cracking under the weight of his own cowardice. "Mel, come on. Just write the check. It is tradition. Mom is just stressed. Do it for us." I looked at him. Really looked at him. For 4 years, I had seen a man who was kind but misunderstood. A man crushed by a domineering mother. Now, with the smell of cheap Merlot filling the air, the filter vanished. I saw a liability. I saw a man who would watch me drown just so he wouldn't have to get his feet wet. I picked up my purse. I didn't look at Barbara. I didn't give her the satisfaction of eye contact. I looked straight at Brian and delivered 2 words. Transaction declined. I turned on my heel and walked out. I didn't run. I walked with the rhythm of a woman who had just cleared a bad debt from her ledger. The valet brought my car around, a modest sedan I drove to keep up appearances for Brian's sake, and I slid into the driver's seat. The door shut with a solid thud, sealing out the noise, the country club, and the Colemans. 10 seconds ticked by in the air-conditioned silence of the car. By all social conventions, this was the moment for heartbreak. I checked my internal state, expecting tears or panic, but the data coming from my chest was flat. There was no sadness, just a cold, sharp clarity. It felt like waking up after a long, feverish sleep. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my best friend. I dialed the direct line to my chief financial officer, Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "Melissa, is everything all right? It is late." "I am fine, Marcus," I said, my voice steady. "Actually, I am better than fine. I need you to initiate Protocol 0. There was a pause on the other end. Protocol 0? On which account? The Coleman Textile Group. Marcus hesitated. "Melissa, are you sure? That is a legacy contract. We purchase 60% of their output. If we pull the plug tonight without a transition period, they will flatline." I put the car in gear. I want the contract terminated effective immediately. Invoke the quality control clause. Cite the inconsistency in the last shipment. Send the formal notice to Richard Coleman's personal email and copy Barbara. Do it now. "Understood," Marcus said. "The termination letters will go out within the hour." I hung up and merged onto the highway. The Colemans had made a fatal calculation. They looked at my modest car, my quiet demeanor, and my refusal to wear flashy logos, and they assumed I was destitute. They thought I was a nobody trying to marry up. They didn't know that for the last decade, I have been the founder and CEO of Eco Lux Uniforms. I wasn't just a woman trying to join their family. I was the anchor client, keeping their crumbling factory from bankruptcy. Barbara wanted to talk about the smell of poverty. She was about to learn exactly what it smelled like. To understand why my phone call to Marcus was a death sentence for the Coleman family, you have to understand the specific architecture of their business. Or rather, the architecture of their failure. The Coleman Textile Group liked to project an image of old-world prestige. They talked about heritage, craftsmanship, and legacy. But in modern manufacturing, legacy doesn't pay the electric bill. Volume does. And for the past 5 years, they didn't have volume. They had me. My company, Eco Lux Uniforms, specializes in sustainable, high-end linens for luxury hotel chains. We need massive quantities of specific, high thread count organic cotton. 5 years ago, when I first started dating Brian, I noticed his father's factory was idling at 30% capacity. They were hemorrhaging cash. Brian was stressed, constantly talking about layoffs and the pressure on his poor mother. So, I stepped in. Not as his girlfriend, but as a silent savior. I directed my procurement team to shift our primary contracts to Coleman Textiles. I didn't do it because they were the best or the cheapest. In fact, they were neither. I did it because I loved Brian. I wanted to stabilize his family so we could have a life together. By the time Barbara threw that glass of wine in my face, my company was purchasing 60% of their total factory output. That is a contract worth $7,200,000 annually. I was what is known in the industry as an anchor client. I wasn't just customer number 4. I was the payroll. I was the raw material budget. I was the mortgage payment on their country club membership. I never told Barbara the specifics. I never told her that the small online clothing shop she sneered at was actually a global logistics giant. I downplayed my success because Brian had a fragile ego. He needed to feel like the provider, the big man on campus. So, I played the role of the supportive, slightly struggling partner. I let him buy dinner at mid-range restaurants and act like a king, while I quietly paid for the roof over his head through corporate invoices he never saw. That morning, the reality of the anchor client dynamic hit them with the force of a freight train. When an anchor client leaves, they don't just take their profit margin, they take the liquidity. Without my monthly payment of $600,000, the Colemans had zero cash flow. I sat in my office at 8 in the morning, watching the live feed of our supply chain dashboard. The status for Coleman Textiles flipped from active to terminated. At 8:15, my personal phone rang. It was Brian. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I didn't say hello. I just listened. Mel. "You are not going to believe this," he stammered, his voice pitching high with panic. "It is a disaster. Dad is freaking out. Mom is screaming at everyone." "What happened?" I asked, my voice calm, sipping my espresso. "Our biggest client," he gasped. "The one that keeps the lights on. They just pulled the contract. No warning, no meetings, just a legal notice at 6 a.m., claiming quality control issues. Dad says if we can't get them back by Friday, we can't make payroll. We might have to shut down the lines." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the skyline. Brian had no idea. He thought the client was some faceless corporation. He didn't realize the client was the woman he had watched get humiliated 12 hours ago. "That sounds stressful, Brian," I said. "Stressful? Mel, it is a catastrophe. We need cash. Immediately. Look, about last night. I know Mom was harsh, but if you could just front us that $150,000, it would give us a bridge, just until we fix this misunderstanding with the client. Please, I am begging you." The audacity was breathtaking. He was asking me to use my personal money to bail out a crisis I had personally engineered. "I am sorry, Brian," I said. "I can't do that. My assets are tied up at the moment." "Tied up? Tied up in what?" "In better investments," I thought. But out loud, I simply said, "Good luck, Brian." I hung up. The dominoes were already falling. They just couldn't see them yet. 3 days later, the silence broke. Brian didn't call this time. He just showed up. I was in my apartment, reviewing the quarterly projections for my new European expansion, when the buzzer rang. The concierge told me Mr. Coleman was in the lobby, claiming it was an emergency. I told them to send him up. I wanted to see this. I needed to see if there was any spine left in the man I had almost married. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first. It was his cologne, a heavy, musk-scented brand he'd worn since college, but underneath it was the sour, metallic scent of stress, sweat. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. His shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes were darting around my living room, as if looking for an exit. "Mel, thank God," he said, trying to push past me into the foyer. "We need to talk. She is losing it." My arm barred the doorway. There was no retreat in my posture. "We are not talking, Brian. We are done." He stopped, blinking as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "Done? Mel, don't be dramatic. You are upset about the wine. I get it. It was a bad night. But you can't just throw away 4 years. 4 years! Mel, think about everything we have built." I watched him perform. It was a classic negotiation tactic, the sunk cost fallacy. He was banking on the idea that I would be too afraid to lose the time I had already invested. He thought the last 4 years were a down payment on a future, not a bad debt I had already written off. "You didn't build anything, Brian," I said quietly. "I built it, and the wine wasn't a bad night." It was a clarification. He raked a hand through his hair, his desperation morphing into anger. "You are being selfish. You know that? My family is in crisis. That client leaving, it is killing us. Dad is talking about selling the lake house. Mom is crying nonstop. And here you are, holding a grudge over a dry cleaning bill." He paused, lowering his voice, switching tactics to manipulation. "Look, this is a test. Every couple goes through tests. Mom is testing your loyalty. If you step up now, if you write that check, you prove you are one of us. You prove you are Coleman material. Then we get married, and you can help me run the factory. You can fix things from the inside." A laugh nearly escaped me, bitter and sharp. Fix things from the inside? He was offering me a job cleaning up his mess, funded by my own money, in exchange for the privilege of his last name. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was recruiting a bailout. "I am not failing a test, Brian," I said. "I am grading it. And you all failed." I walked over to the entryway table and picked up a thick manila envelope. I had prepared it that morning. "I am not writing you a check," I said, handing it to him. "But I am giving you this." He took it, confused. "What is this? Money?" "It is a formal notice," I said. "Since your factory is claiming financial distress, my company Ecolux Uniforms is exercising its right to a forensic audit. We are sending a team to inspect your books and your quality control logs tomorrow morning. If there are any discrepancies, the termination of our contract becomes permanent for cause." Brian froze. He stared at the logo on the envelope, the logo of the client that had just cut them off. Then he looked at me. The realization hit him slowly, like ice water. "Ecolux?" he whispered. "That is you? You are the client?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just closed the door in his face. The lock clicked shut, loud and final. The next morning, the audit team descended on the Coleman factory like a SWAT team in gray suits. I wasn't there physically, I didn't need to be. I watched the progress through updates from my lead forensic accountant, Sarah. At 10 a.m., Sarah texted, "Richard is trying to block access to the server room. Says it is proprietary data." We reminded him of Clause 14. He backed down. At noon, the update was darker. Inventory counts don't match shipping logs. Significant raw material missing. But at 2 p.m., the real bomb dropped. Sarah called me. Her voice was tight, professional but urgent. "Melissa, you need to see this. We found a secondary ledger. It was hidden in a subfolder on the accounts payable drive." "What is it?" I asked. "Incompetence?" "No," she said. "It is not incompetence. It is embezzlement." I sat up straighter. For the last 3 years, the company has been paying consulting fees to a shell corporation called JBC Holdings, Sarah explained. The payments are consistent $20,000 here, $40,000 there. They coincide almost perfectly with the dates of major supply payments from your company. Basically, every time you paid them, a chunk was siphoned off immediately. Where is the money going? I asked. We traced the shell company, Sarah said. It is registered to a P.O. box in Nevada, but the withdrawals are happening at casinos. Melissa, JBC Holdings isn't a consultant. It is a funnel for gambling debts. The pieces slammed into place, Barbara's desperation, the constant cash flow issues despite my massive orders, the entrance fee of $150,000. It wasn't for family tradition. It wasn't because I was poor. Barbara Coleman was a gambling addict. She had been bleeding the factory dry to feed the slots or the tables, and she was drowning. The $150,000 wasn't a test of loyalty. It was a deadline. She probably owed a shark or a bookie, and the payment was due the day after the engagement party. And Brian? I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. Did he know? Sarah sighed. His signature is on the authorization for the wire transfers to the shell company. He knew, Melissa. He was signing off on it. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. The betrayal had mutated. It wasn't just that he was a mama's boy. It was that he was an accomplice. He had courted me, proposed to me, and tried to marry me. All while knowing his mother was stealing from the very business that put food on his table. He wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for a fresh host for their parasite. The sadness I expected to feel never arrived. It was replaced by a cold, burning disgust. They weren't just bad business partners. They were criminals. And now, I had the evidence to prove it. I picked up the file Sarah had emailed me. It was titled The Shadow Ledger. I printed a single copy. I put it in my leather briefcase. It was time for a meeting. Barbara didn't wait for an appointment. When the reality of the audit hit her when she realized the walls were closing in, she did exactly what a narcissist does when cornered. She attacked. She stormed into the lobby of my corporate headquarters at 3 p.m. She was screaming at the receptionist, demanding to see the owner. She looked frantic. Her perfectly coiffed hair was fraying at the edges, and her designer suit looked slept in. She didn't look like the queen of the country club anymore. She looked like a fugitive. I told security to let her up. I wanted this conversation on my turf. She burst into the boardroom where I was sitting at the head of a 20-foot glass table. I was alone. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are behind this? You represent Eco-Lux?" I didn't stand up. I didn't offer her a seat. I just gestured to the file in front of me. "Hello, Barbara." She slammed her hands on the table, leaning in, her face twisted. "You can't do this. You are ruining us. Do you know what happens if you cancel this contract? We lose everything. The factory, the house, the reputation. How dare you? After we welcomed you into our home." "Welcomed?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "You threw wine in my face and demanded $150,000 to cover your gambling debts." She froze. The color drained from her face so fast it looked painful. "I know about JBC Holdings." "Barbara," I said, sliding the Shadow Ledger report across the glass toward her, "I know about the shell company. I know about the wire transfers to Nevada, and I know that the entrance fee wasn't for tradition. It was to pay off a loan shark before he broke your legs." She stared at the file, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "You weren't disgusted by me because I was poor," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "You were disgusted because you thought I was poor. You needed money. Desperately. You projected your own bankruptcy onto me. That is what that was, Barbara. A projection. You looked at me and you saw your own fear reflected back." She started to shake. Tears, real, terrified tears welled up in her eyes. The arrogance vanished, replaced by pure, pathetic begging. "Melissa, please," she whispered, clutching the edge of the table. "You don't understand. It got out of control. I can fix it. I just need time. Please, don't ruin us. Think of Brian. He loves you. Brian signed the checks. Barbara, I said. He isn't a victim. He is an accomplice. I stood up then, smoothing my skirt. I walked to the door and opened it. 2 uniformed security guards were waiting outside. I am not calling the police, Barbara, I said. She let out a sob of relief. Oh, thank God. Thank you, Melissa. I am not calling them because I don't have to, I finished. I already sent this file to the IRS and the district attorney's office an hour ago. They are waiting for you downstairs in the lobby. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the doorframe to hold herself up. Get out of my office, I said. She didn't argue. She couldn't. She stumbled out into the hallway, flanked by the guards, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen her. I watched her go until the elevator doors closed, sealing her fate. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was weightless. It was the sound of a debt being paid in full. The collapse of the Coleman dynasty wasn't a tragedy. It was a market correction. Within 3 months, the factory was liquidated. Without the revenue from Ecolux, the debts imploded. The banks seized the equipment, the building, and the land. I heard through the grapevine that the machinery was sold for pennies on the dollar to a competitor in Ohio. Barbara didn't go to prison, but in some ways, her fate was worse. She accepted a plea deal for the embezzlement charges to avoid jail time, but the restitution wiped her out completely. She lost the lake house, the country club membership, and her status. She is currently living in a 1-bedroom apartment across town, and for the first time in her life, she is working. I believe she is a greeter at a department store. I imagine it is humbling. As for Brian, he tried to reach out. For weeks, my phone would light up with calls from unknown numbers, voicemails pleading that he was innocent, that he was just a victim of his mother's madness. I never listened to them. I didn't block him out of anger. I blocked him because he was no longer relevant to my balance sheet. He was a bad investment I had divested from, and successful CEOs don't obsess over sunken costs. Tonight, I am sitting in my design studio. The city lights are glittering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. On the mannequin in the corner is the centerpiece of my new collection, the Coleman line. It is a series of high-fashion silk blouses and suits treated with my proprietary hydrophobic coating. We are marketing it as armor for the modern woman. The tagline is, "Let the world spill its mess. You stay clean." It is already our best-selling launch in company history. The vintage Cabernet, the same vintage Barbara threw at me that night in the velvet room, poured rich and dark into the crystal. I held the glass up to the light. It was beautiful. I took a sip. It was rich, complex, and expensive. I set the glass down gently on my white marble desk. Not a single drop spilled. They wanted me to pay an entrance fee to join their misery. They wanted $150,000 to buy a ticket to a life of debt and deception. It was a high price, but in the end, walking away cost me nothing but a dry cleaning bill. I didn't buy my way into their family. I bought my freedom. And that is the only luxury that is truly worth the price. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic person to save your own sanity or your bank account, hit that share button, and don't forget to follow for more stories about women who don't just survive, they CEO their way out.